May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable always in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Amen.
Amen.
Someone once advised that the wise way to prepare for joy or sorrow is to take the road of the Stoics of antiquity. Here's their worldly wisdom. Cut yourself off from emotion. Keep everyone and everything at a distance. Build a fortress around your soul. Do not risk the price of wonder or of heartache. We are moving toward Lent. As we move towards Lent, the question before us is this: will we be ruled by Stoicism, or will we risk the price of sorrowing and suffering? And will we risk surprise and celebration when life somehow is redeemed from the ashes? This last Sunday after the Epiphany is a pivot point in the gospel. Peter, James, and John accompany Jesus up the mountain after hearing the prediction of his passion. We don't have access to their thoughts, but it is fair to imagine that in their minds they have been playing out the days and weeks to come. They are probably imagining the worst. And we know this story well. Their entry into Jerusalem, conflict and strife, betrayal, trumped-up charges, and judicial irregularities, the breaking of their fellowship, his anguishing death on the cross, and accusatory fingers pointing at them and saying, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" They begin to look for alternatives, desperate for a second opinion, a way to stop time, an exit plan. They want to rest in the moment, to build a safe sanctuary away from the world, saving Jesus and themselves from disaster and despair. Of course, they cannot, nor can we. Though it is our human tendency to one time to slow down and for the moment to last, though we want to postpone suffering and sorrow, we cannot stop the march of time or alter the course of history. We are confined to the contingencies of our creaturely limitations and our mortality. The gospel story of the Transfiguration is given to us that there are moments when God is present to us in sorrow and suffering, just as God is present in the promise and potential of our lives when everything is sunny and seemingly right with the world. We do not dwell on the mountaintop. Most of the time we live life in the valley. though we have highs, Christians tend to prefer the low places. We prefer humility. After all, we are formed of the earth, and to earth we shall return. Humility is the only ground where it is safe to stand. And so we say on Ash Wednesday, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." That sober acknowledgement sounds like sanity. It sounds like health. Though our lives may be changed by extraordinary moments, a lightning strike, the flash of a bright light, theologically speaking, an epiphany, life is mostly lived in the ordinary. Those ordinary moments can be filled with an extraordinary grace. Strangely and wonderfully, the moment of transfiguration is just such a moment. On the one hand, the transfiguration affirms Jesus' divinity, his transfigured appearance, his dazzling raiment, his exaltation over the holy men of old, the bright cloud overshadowing the disciples, the heavenly voice, the divine imperative. On the other hand, and more subtly, it opens the disciples' eyes to see God's light in the chaos to come, to see God's light even in death, loss, and fear, and everything else that follows: the empty tomb, the crucified one suddenly appearing to those who are sad and afraid, his Spirit abiding with his followers who are transformed by the surprise of his resurrection and who go forth to share his light with others. Transformed people who transcended boundaries and barriers of all kinds: political, social, cultural, economic, and religious. The challenge to the disciples is to live in the world without him. The Transfiguration anticipates this challenge, inviting us, in the words of the Apostle Paul, to live in the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. God prepares people in the transcendent encounters in our lives to endure the world of suffering and sorrow, the world of the cross, the world that breaks us, but which is never beyond redemption. These encounters happen on mountaintops with a blinding flash of light for some, but for most, they happen in the ordinary moments of, classrooms, meeting rooms, food pantries, or in the simple space of a small group gathering, or the intimacy of a tete-a-tete, or even a chance meeting in a store or a parking lot, any safe space where we offer hospitality and make a place for the Holy One to be present. Here's the good news. The Transfiguration offers the disciples the paradox that while there is nothing they can do to save themselves from pain and suffering, there is also no way they can shield themselves from the light of God that brings hope in the darkest moment. It turns out that the mountain was a way for Christ to prepare a human band of companions for the sacred, to offer something to hold on to when they re-enter into the crushing reality of the world below. Remember what happens after Christ's transfiguration, after the brightness of the cloud, after the heavenly voice, after the divine command to listen to him. After his transfiguration, the disciples fall down in fear. They were overwhelmed. What were they afraid of? Were they afraid of the sights and sounds of that awesome experience, or the commanding voice and the imperative of following him where he would lead them, even to the cross? But remember what happens next. Jesus comes to them, touches them, and raises them up, a resurrection from fear to faith. And he says to them, "Don't be afraid." In other words, don't be afraid to come down from the mountain. Don't be afraid to go back to a broken world full of hurting people in need of healing. Don't be afraid to love boldly and generously. Don't be afraid to forgive and to reconcile. Don't be afraid to work for justice and peace. And don't be afraid to risk failure and to fall short of good intentions. Don't be afraid to take a risk by taking a step in faith. In short, Christ says to us, don't be afraid to follow me. The very good news is that God comes to us in ways so ordinary, so mundane, that we might imagine offering the same grace to each other and to the world. Here's how. Patrick J. Wilson observes that God comes into the world not simply as the brilliant cloud of mystery, not only as a voice thundering from heaven, but also as a human hand laid upon a shoulder, and the words, "Do not be afraid." God comes to us quietly, gently, tenderly, so that we may draw near and not be afraid. God's glory is majestic and so far beyond our capacity to receive it that we can just take as much of God's glory as a human hand can hold. God's glory and magnificence and power and majesty are unsurpassable. We say, God is great, and that is true. But we must also declare that God's glory and magnificence and power and majesty are surpassed by God's willingness to shed them all, to give up the glory, in order that we might finally recognize God's love and God's gentleness. The measureless power that made the heavens and the earth concentrates in a hand reaching to us. Some would say that God is much too much to be contained within the walls of a church. Of course, they're right. Some would remind us that God is so great that neither earth nor the heavens above can hold God. And certainly we must agree with them. God is certainly so great that God can never be contained in something as small, as insignificant as a crumb of bread or a sip of wine. We nod our heads, yes. But we must hasten to add, furthermore, God is so great, so majestic, so glorious, that God deigns to come to us in a morsel of bread and a taste of wine, just as much of God as a hand can hold. Something we can receive into our hands, something we can share with others. The hands of Christ reaching out on the hard wood of the cross, that all may come within the reach of his saving embrace. Thanks be to God. Amen.